rules around the meeting before or while IT just assists the MEC with the technical issues. Members, MEC officials, any members of the public, welcome to the Standing Committee on Budget this morning, scheduled from 9 till 12. Just in terms of members in attendance, we have just received one apology from member Dirk Wessels, and member Benedicta van Minnen is the alternate for member Wessels. So just if we can just do a quick round of introductions from the members, please just indicate if you are a permanent member of the Budget Committee or not. So I'm Peter Johnson, I'm the chairperson of this committee, and the first name that I see is Benedicta van Minnen.
If it's working,
Good morning, everybody. I'm Benedicta van Minnen. I am an alternate standing in for member Wessels this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tozama Ditakong, and I am the full-time member. Thank you.
Good morning. Norma French Mbombo, member of the committee. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, colleagues. My name is Noko Masipa. I'm a permanent member of this committee, and we welcome Honorable Ditagon to this committee, Chair, on your behalf.
Hey, order.
Good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning. I'm Leon van Wyk. I'm a member of the WCPP.
Good morning, Chair
Chair.
and colleagues. I'm Beto Pietros, member of this committee.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Beauty Stoffel. I'm an alternate on this committee. Thank you.
Morning, Chairperson. My name is Nomin Kondlo. I'm a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I just want to check, Mr. Davids. I'm sure we are co-rated.
Yes, Chairperson, you are correct, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davids. I just want to check whether the MEC can hear us at this stage. I think I heard her earlier.
Chair, we just, there we go.
8354.
There we go. Minister can be heard, Chair.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, something's happening with my MS Team, so it's not allowing me to choose unmute or mute, and I cannot see the panel. I cannot see the chat. It's like completely different. So I'm just going to leave the unmute on and not tamper with it, if that's okay with you, Chair.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you for joining us, Minister. I thought you would be on a cycle, on a bike between Plettenberg Bay and somewhere on the Garden Route, but thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate it.
No problem, thank you.
Okay, with that being said, we have introduced the members. Minister, over to you and the Provincial Treasury. I don't think it's necessary to introduce the entire team, perhaps just those that will be speaking on the presentation today. If you can just indicate who those are for introductions, please.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and apologies. I think my MS team might be updating or something, but I'm not as technologically inclined as some of my colleagues. In terms of today's briefing, it deals with the Q3 performance and financial outcomes for the 2024-25 financial year. As you may know, Chair, we have also already concluded the final quarter of the 2024-25 financial year, which we will bring to the committee hopefully in June. So this information is as at the end of December. So the January, February, March information you will see in the Q4 performance, which we'll be bringing in a next presentation, and it's a quite standard statutory information that we're presenting to you today, as we do every quarter. I'm going to ask the HOD just to introduce our team leads on the presentation, and then I'll hand over to them to take us through the presentation. Thank you. And also, I'm now going to mute in case you hear some background noise because I'm too scared to touch this MS Team thing now.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you. Over to you, HOD.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members, Minister colleagues. The Minister's already indicated the period that we'll be covering this morning. The financial information will be covered by Ms. Annalise Peck, and the performance information by the Department of the Premier with the lead, Dr. Zainat Ishmael. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, HOD. I think we can start with the presentation from the Provincial Treasury.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask the Treasury staff to please flight the presentation. Good morning to the members of the Budget Committee. Yes, we're here for Q3 reporting on the 2024-25 financial year. That, as Minister has indicated, it is until spending as at end of December. So what we thought we would do is just, if we could cast our minds back in terms of the next slide, please, is in terms of cast our minds back in terms of what the context was for December. And so firstly, in terms of for the month of December, it represents 1 month after we've tabled our 2024 adjustments estimates. And when we also then look at the adjustments estimates, part of casting our mind back, we are then also then indicating then in terms of what we responded to in that adjustments estimate and on adjusting our main budget. We looked at and responded to some fiscal pressures. The adjustments budget was also there to create some fiscal sustainability for the remainder of the 24-25 financial year. It enabled us then also to do some planning for the last 6 months of the current 24-25 financial year, based on any allocations that departments would have received in the adjustments budget. And then lastly, it was also as preparations for, at that stage, is some of the assumptions we were making for preparation of budget 2025. So what is those allocations then provided for? Very much at a high level, we got some funding around the flood damage support, if everybody can remember, from the national government. We were also then looking at, in terms of, as I indicated, alleviating some in-year pressures. We also then allowed for any of the rollovers of the previous financial year, that is 23-24, and any overcollection of the revenue of 23-24, we took up in the adjustments budget as part of rollover and revenue retention. We allowed for some realignment and in terms of reprioritization of certain for projects over the MTEF. And lastly, also, we tried to be as proactive as we could be at that stage for any allocations around, for example, area fire support. So that was in terms of the context in which this reporting that we are going to be presenting to you. And so the department was 1 month into this kind of responding to the adjustments budget. And we need to keep that in mind for both from a performance perspective and then also from the financial perspective that we're going to be representing you. From here onwards, I'm handing over to Dr. Ishmael to take us through on the performance side. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, Chair.
Yes, just hold on, JB. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I am handing over to 2 colleagues, Mr. Jock Barnett, who is the lead in the performance data, and then to Mr. Faisal Noordin, who is the lead in outcomes data. And it's also opportunity for more officials to engage the budget committee. So I do say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members. The following slide will prepared by the Department of the Premier, will share an overview of the provincial and institutional non-financial performance for Q3, as indicated by Annelies, and it is based on validated performance approved by institutions. On the first slide that we see, you can see the provincial performance was at 83% for Q3, meaning that 514 of the, or 427 of the 514 targets were achieved for this quarter by the province. On a departmental level, there was an 85% achievement. One department achieved 100% of their targets, and there was a partial achievement of 10% and non-achievement of 5% of the targets. It's also can be viewed that the governance cluster performed at a 91%, the best of all the clusters. On a public entity level, the achievements was at 73%. 3 out of the 10 public entities achieved 100% of all the targets. There were partial achievements of 19%, and then also targets of 9% were not achieved. Again, also with the provincial departments, the public entities achieved better in the governance cluster at 87%. Next slide. Right. If we look at the performance on an institutional level, in this case departments, the overall performance for departments had an increase on the average performance for Q3 of 85% compared to the previous Q2, that was 84%. And we can just note that for Q4, there's also an increase that has been reported up to 86%. 9 of our departments achieved more than or equal to the provincial average of 85%. There are also 4 departments that achieved a little bit less than the 85%. They include Department of Health at 82%, Economic Development and Tourism at 65%, Infrastructure at 58%, and Environmental Affairs and Development Planning at 50%. You will also note that in the Q3 release, under Annexure 3, departments also share reasons for deviations. And in summary, it is based on demand-driven indicators, dependencies on other stakeholders, some resource constraints, and some factors in the socio-economic environment. Then on the next slide, this is a view similar to the one I've showed just now on public entities. And the overall performance of public entities revealed an average of 73%. 6 of the departments achieved more than or equal to the Western Cape government average. The following 4 entities achieved less than the 73% average. These are the Western Cape Liquor Authority at 53%, the Language Commission at 50%, Westkro at 50%, and Casidra at 69%. The reasons for deviations also shared in the release included issues on stakeholders, delay on internal processes, as well as the revision of some of the program focuses that we work on. Okay, I hand over to my colleague, Faisal Noordin, who will share insights into the socio-economic environment for Q3.
Thank you. So for each of the following 3 slides, we got in line with the priorities of the PSP. So the first slide would give you your outcome measures on the left-hand side, and your table on the right-hand side just picks out some of the highlights in terms of what departments have delivered under the priority area. And then the full document for each department, you have a lot more of the performance highlights. In this first slide, In terms of growth for jobs, firstly to note in terms of the outcomes that for Q3 of 2024, the GDP for the Western Cape decreased by 0.7%. Further data then indicates that for Q4 there was a positive increase of 0.5% for the GDP of the Western Cape. In Q3, the Western Cape unemployment rate decreased to 19.6%. And then again, further data indicated that Q4 was also 19.6%. And yesterday, the Q1 2025 data also indicated again the Western Cape unemployment rate at 19.6%. Further to that, the number of people unemployed decreased in Q3 from 765,000 in the previous quarter to 670,000 in Q3. However, this increased slightly to 686,000 people unemployed in Q4. And then according to yesterday's data, again, it increased again to 697,000 people unemployed. So some of the performance highlights there in terms of the Department of Social Development, 650 EPWP work opportunities were provided, and 3,045 youth participated in skills development programs for the quarter. Department of Infrastructure, again, 2,188 work opportunities were created. The Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, 94% of the EIA applications were finalized within legislated timeframes. Department of Agriculture, 191 jobs created for EPWP workers. There was rehabilitation of 7,926 hectares of agricultural land, and 558 participants were trained in skills development. TDAT, 19 businesses were supported with business development services. 44 businesses were supported through access to finance programs, and 341 individuals were registered as tourist guides. As part of our entities, Freeport Saldanha, 3,355 businesses were supported, and Westgrow provided, there was 12 trade declarations signed for exports of goods and services from the Western Cape. Furthermore, there was commitment to one investment project. Next slide, please. In terms of safety, Q3 saw a decrease of 8% year-over-year from the previous quarter, up from Q3 of the previous year. And then also there was a 9% increase in the homicide compared to the previous quarter. So remember that Q3 refers to your December period. So the 9% increase, we normally see that the December period does have a spike in homicides. The actual numbers are there were 1,268 homicides in Q3 of 2024-25 compared to 1,374 in Q3 of the previous year. So that's your 8% decrease. In terms of the 13 priority areas in the Cape Metro.
Look here, this is how they do it.
There was
I don't know why he's sending it like that.
Tanya?
Please continue.
Faisal, you on mute?
Faisal, please continue, Faisal.
Sorry, somebody muted me. Sorry. I'll just pick up again. So in terms of the 13 priority areas, there was a 9% decrease compared to Q3 of the previous year, and the homicides in these 13 priority areas accounted for 48% of all the homicides in the province. There was also a 1% decrease in the number of sexual presentations at our hospitals. Some of the highlights in terms of the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety, 83 neighborhood watch structures were approved for accreditation, and 15 police stations were assessed. Department of Health and Wellness approximately 94.2% of our patient safety incident cases were closed in regional hospitals. And then that's the breakdown for the other types of hospitals we have. Also, there was a 20.5% response time under 15 minutes for EMSP1 emergency calls in urban locations. In terms of DST, 726 children were placed in foster care. 519 victims of crime and violence were provided access to services and safe environments, as well as 246 children in conflict with the law were referred to diversion programs. In terms of the Department of Infrastructure, 8,612 kilometers of gravel roads were bladed to enhance safety and serviceability. In terms of environmental affairs and development planning, there was one completed criminal investigation handed to the NPA. There was also, in terms of the Department of Mobility, 970 speed operations and 1,478 traffic law enforcement operations. 491,979 vehicles were stopped and inspected, and 1,064 drunken driving operations were also conducted. In the Western Cape Liquor Authorities had 67 enforcement operations with other agencies, and 56% of liquor license tribunal fines were issued. There was also a further 846 inspections conducted, focusing on underage drinking and access to restricted areas. Next slide, please. So some of the outcomes measured in terms of well-being, the HIV positive rate for 15 to 24-year-olds so that should be third quarter, was 1.32%, which was exactly on target. And then 15.4% of children born in government facilities in the quarter weighed under 2,500 grams, which was below the target of 16.5%. And then some of our service delivery highlights again. In terms of the education department, 755 ECD facilities were fully registered as compliant. 52.8% of assessed grade 3s can read for meaning, and 55.8% of grade 3s attained acceptable outcomes for mathematics. In terms of the Department of Health and Wellness, 78.8% of TB clients completed their DSTB treatment, and 66.5% of children under 1 year completed their primary course of immunization. Department of Social Development, 4,661 older persons benefited from subsidized beds. 8,442 older persons benefited from subsidies that were transferred to community-based care and support services. 6,070 victims of GBV access psychosocial support services, 108 persons with disabilities living in government-owned residential facilities, and 20,749 vulnerable persons were provided with subsidized meals. Agriculture supported 865 households with agricultural food production initiatives, 219 veterinary public health samples were analyzed for food safety, and 154 inspections were carried out at meat producing outlets. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're moving now on to the financial outcomes for end of December 2024. And as I indicated in the contextualization of this presentation, it is 1 month into the adjustment budget tabling, and as you can see there, the adjustments budget then amounted to 85.7 billion rand. So in terms of where we find ourselves at the end of December in terms of spending, we spent about 62.5 billion rand, just about over. By the end of December, that amounted to about under 73% spend of our budget. And at that stage, we were having two departments, meaning the Department of Local Government and then also the Department of Health and Wellness. At that stage, they were showing a combined underspending to the value of about 64 million rand. A little bit more of that detail on the 64 million will come in terms of the slides to follow. So when on the next slide, we are then also showing you here in terms of visually and then proportionally just in terms of what the departments have spent their budget on at that time in terms of end of December, where you can see the blue then represents in terms of compensation, COE spend in terms of personnel spend, where the green then represents in terms of transfer payments that has been made by the department. The red represents the goods and services that the department has purchased, and then also the yellow is in terms of capital spend by the various departments at that stage. And so you can see that based in terms of the different mandates, there's different service delivery models, and you can see in terms of overall majority of them are based and are dependent on their composition, their personnel spend, and then most of them followed then by transfer payments in terms of what they're spending their money on. So when we look at the detail on this, on the 64 million rand underspending in the next slide, and I refer to the Department of Health and Wellness and Local Government. So at that stage, in terms of what their projections were showing them, at that stage, the Department of Health and Wellness was showing an under expenditure of just a little bit over 60 million rand at year end, that where they were projecting. But then we also need to understand that this is a net underspending. So there are some pressures within health, mainly in terms of goods and services, and this is a pressure as we've previously reported to the standing committee, but also it is a sectoral pressure, meaning that all health departments in the country is facing the pressure on goods and services, and then also in terms of from our particular department, it is in terms of looking also at some of the underfunding that they've made on finance leases, and on which they are looking at resolving as the financial year continues. So when we look at in terms of GNS and goods and services, what they were projecting, there was a residual projection of pressure of about 168 million on goods and services, and then in terms of on capital assets, there was also then a pressure of about 50 million rand. And so what the voters usually does, and in terms of is our expectation, is the fact that the underspending that they have been experiencing on their compensation of employees, that they will then offset against the pressures on GNS that they are facing towards the latter part of the financial year. When we cast our minds to and our eyes to local government and the other half of the slide, at that stage, they have spent 70% of their budget, if you remember, and then they were showing a net underspending of about 3.5 million rand. And that underspending was mainly on compensation of employees due to staff exits at that stage, and then also the recruitment process taking a bit longer than what they have anticipated, which then leads into some projected savings on their side. Again, similar to health, this is then a vote that do in the second half of a financial year face in terms of some pressures, and some of them being on the goods and services and the transfers and subsidies, and we are expecting them to utilize that savings in towards that. I then do one of the pressures that they would face, even though we made allowances in the adjustment estimate, but we saw in terms of how many fires we did have from the month of December right through up until last month, as it is. So we are expecting then the vote to utilize some of that underspending towards those pressures that they would be facing. The next slide then concentrates and looks at the spending of public entities as at end of December, and as at end of December, after adjusting their main budgets, The spending then amounted to about 896 million rand for our public entities, and that is in terms of the equivalent of about 68% of its budget. We also had then three departments, entities, which were showing in terms of a projected underspending at that stage. One of them in terms of being Casidra, and that is in terms of underspending on COE at that stage. Freeport Saldanha was also on compensation of employees. And then in terms of the Liquor Authority at that stage is in terms of a 407,000 underspending at that age. And that with the Liquor Authority, it is really based in terms of a alignment to their revenue predictions. So as soon as they see that they do not, perhaps in terms of there's a risk of not attaining their revenue targets, they then also then look at in terms of where, in terms of from an expenditure perspective, can they reduce if they should need to do so, if the targets do come through. Then they've then identified in terms of certain areas in terms of the Liquor Authority. I need to indicate that at this stage it is still projection and not in terms of final outcome for the entity. Other than that, in terms of the entities, for the month of reporting, there was no risks identified by any of the entities in terms of the reporting system at that stage. When we look at the expenditure in terms of infrastructure, so this is also then post the adjustments budget, where we need to indicate that from an infrastructure perspective in the adjustments budget, we increased the infrastructure budget by about 832 million rand. Now, that was mainly because of the allocation we received for disaster funding. And if you remember, there was 5 votes that were impacted by the funding that we received in the adjustments budget. And then also we received the BFI money for the education department for the rapid school build program. So there was, in terms of a big jump in the adjustments budget where for the month of December. So what that would mean then practically within departments that we need to understand is that they would need to realign their adjustment and adjust their project list as per the funding that they received, and in the month they would be in that planning mode in terms of readjusting the project outline. But when we look at the performance in terms of quarter three that we have spent 8.1 billion rand of our 12.2 billion adjusted budget. And that is in the region of about 67 to 68% of our adjustment budget spend. When we look then in terms of what that spending was spent on in terms of the categories of infrastructure, and then you'll see that the majority then, first of all, where we went and put our money in the adjustments budget was in our existing infrastructure. And that's therefore in terms of where majority of our spend then also comes about for the spend on for our spend. And you will see then on existing infrastructure, by that stage, we spent about 70% of our budget on the existing infrastructure. On our replaced infrastructure, meaning in terms of our new infrastructure that we were building, we were spending 62% of that already. And then transfers we were making in terms of the infrastructure spend. And this is mainly in terms of human settlement, in terms of that model is used there. It was 66.1% of spend of our adjusted budget. So that is in terms of when we're looking at our infrastructure. When we move along and look at our revenue projections and where we were finding at this stage, as at end of December, we have there's no risks to report in terms of collection of revenue, and this is the revenue that we collect, our own revenue now, either own revenue by departments or by the taxes that we collect through our gambling taxes, and then also in terms of through motor vehicle licenses is another tax that we collect in terms of funding from that perspective. There's no risk on the collection by departments on their own receipts. At that stage, December, they were projecting to over-collect by 119% by the end of the financial year, after they've collected amount of 784 million in December. And then in terms of our taxes, in terms of our collection, that has mainly been driven by the over-collection projected is mainly by gambling taxes, and that is in terms of given the growing trend in terms of online gambling in the sports and the betting sectors, which has done so. So all in all, at this stage, Chair, like as I indicated, it is the month of reporting for December is in terms of 1 month after the adjustments budget, and therefore in the system of reporting, neither departments nor entities has indicated any risks in terms of spend for the financial year. And and I think the last slide is just for us to say thank you, Chair. And then we hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pick, and thank you to all the presenters this morning. Members, we will now move over to questions based on the presentation. If you can please just raise your hands if you have any questions to the Provincial Treasury based on the presentation that we just received. Mr. Davids, if you can please just help me check if there are any questions.
No problem, Chair.
Members, no questions this morning. Can you hear me?
Hello, Chairperson.
There we go. I see one question. I see Member Kondlo first. Kondlo first and Member Masipa.
Morning again, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Whilst one acknowledges or understand that this is a presentation of a quarterly performance of last year, so it's not necessarily real time. It's work that has already happened, and even the questions that we'll be asking at this particular point, the department will supposedly tell us that some of the things have been resolved in Q4 or even in a new quarter. So I think it's one of those issues perhaps as the budget committee we just need to have a conversation about, because it's just to deal with a post factor with almost, I think, another quarter, which is this year, which is the last quarter before the end of the financial year of last year. I'm raising this, Chair, because one's questions, would not be real time in any way. But I've got just maybe some questions I want to ask to the Minister and then to the department. To the Minister, I just want to understand, how does this particular quarterly performance reporting enables us as an oversight, because we are not an audit committee. Auditing will be done by the internal auditors, and also the AG will do the auditing. My interest is especially on the high level outcomes set by the provincial government on what it seeks to achieve, going forward in as far as the economic growth of this province, and how such is being financed through this particular department. How does this particular report assist us on that sort of aggregate outcomes? So maybe Minister can be able to help me in this one. And I'm raising this, for example, we've got a G4J, a strategy, beyond going into the granular aspects of this department and the other. How can, if I wanted to use the quarterly performance report to see whether are we still on track in as far as the total budget that was given from the provincial treasury to the provincial government as a collective, and then secondly to the individual departments, So how would this particular provincial report be able to assist such? Secondly, how would this quarterly performance report, and I'm raising quarterly performance report in general, I'm not asking quarter 3 in this context, I'm asking the principle of quarterly reports, how would they assist this committee as an oversight a body, to also be able to monitor the fiscal contribution, to jobs. As we understand that the money that the MEC or the minister provides to government is to ensure that at the end, what we have prioritized, and we've even given quantitatively, the presentation of the number in both the GDP growth of the province and the number of jobs. So if minister can just give me that response, how as a member would I be able to see such, in as far as these quarterly performance reports are concerned? Then going into the department, I'm interested, I think it's Ms. Fick, if I'm not mistaken. I'm interested to understand, I'm not sure what is the slide number, but it's the one that I think the one that deals with the financial outcomes of 2024. On the underspending, and I'm just raising this is post facto, and I think this is exactly the period of the budget adjustment. What I'm interested in, Ms. Fick, is to understand the issue of underspending on COE. And I'll raise this because it's an issue that I always raise every time we come to this conversation. For me, one, you colleagues, you will always tell us it is because of delays in the appointments which are beyond your control due to staff exits and all of this. And here you look at, I think on this particular slide, it says local government at the time, there was 3.571 million, which were underspent due to staff exits and longer than anticipated recruitment processes. Health was sitting at 60.441 million underspending on COE. Now, my question is, because then this money goes, I'm told, I think in the latter slides, you say the money goes on goods and services. What happens, unless I'm mistaken in listening to you colleagues, I thought you would have said one of the principles in as far as COE is concerned is that money of COE cannot be used for something else. It must then be returned back to the provincial treasury. So how does it happen that money of COE gets to be used or allocated for goods and services? That's the first question. Secondly, this continuous underspending, especially of these particular amounts. I mean, 3.5 and 60.4 million is actually a significant amount. What happens with you as treasury? Is there any conversation you are having with departments, including yourselves, because even yourselves you have been found wanting on the very issue of a COE spend? Because my issue here is that when you are doing planning in your strategic planning or when you're establishing your APP, I fail to understand that when you plan for appointments of this particular number of people, and then understanding, because the historics are always there, you can be able to go and do a market analysis of the time it takes to get to recruit people, let alone in specialized fields. So this notion of delayed by appointments does not go for me, because it would mean at the planning stage you didn't factor this in as a risk. For you, in the third quarter, you are telling us you could not spend so much of the money that would have gone to other service delivery pressures. So is this a conversation that you are having? And what is it that is driving year in and year out, this underspending on COE, especially of these kind of amounts? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. Member Masipa.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the presenters. It was quite insightful. I've got clarity-seeking questions that pertains to. Obviously, we understand that you over budget. Obviously, projecting that inflation on goods and services might be a little bit higher, which we do understand that. But I think the question is, what happens then when the money is not spent as such because you expected, obviously, the inflation to go high? And the issue is, obviously, you talk about the offsetting. The issue really mainly the impact on, having built this buffer to cater for goods and services inflation. And at the same time, you juggle with the issue of fewer staff having to deliver, obviously, on the G4J strategy as such, in some certain areas, And I think the question is, how do we really make sure that our numbers, are not really impacting negatively on the cost of employment, if I have to put it that way, to ensure that, service continue and we are able really to move in terms of the creation of jobs. So I also want to go to slide number 9. Slide number 9 talks about the well-being and HIV positive rate and, talk to these issues. I know this question, it might really be finding its location in the health committee, but I just want to put it out there. We had a seminar of parliamentary network where the discussion, the summit was around investment in women's health, And I'm just thinking that, this could be one of the key measures, because if you take care of women's health, you literally, translate that women's health into economic development and economic benefits. So I just thought that maybe, Minister, you can just think about that in terms of, how are we really putting resources to support women's health, because, we know that there are many households that are really led by women, single women, and so forth. And if we do well there, we know that, ultimately we will get the results that we are looking for. The other point that I just want to, but this is not a question, but it's just a reflection on the note that talks about provincial expenditure as at 31 December 2024. It has got no page, but that's the health and wellness and the local government. On the local government, you say that reflecting spending amounted to 306 million, or 70% of the 437 million adjustment budget, with a projected net underspending of 3.571 million. Can you just maybe help us just to understand why the net projected is 3.57 instead of the 131? And again, I think Honorable Ngondla did say that, we talking about what has happened already. So maybe just to clarify as to what accounting happens there, to ultimately come to 3.571 million instead of the 131,097. If that explanation can be provided, I'll appreciate. That's it from my side, Chairperson.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Minister and HOD, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I will leave some of the more technical items in the financial part to the team and the technical items in the non-financial part to .P. But I'll try my best to deal quite high level with some of the processes that we go through. And I'll start with .P, and Dr. Ishmael has done some absolutely amazing work on this front. Even in the previous administration, I remember some new innovations. But I'll start with the .p side. So, for example, we have our provincial strategic plan, and that provincial strategic plan has to set out your 5-year plan for your particular province, and that's where our non-financial performance information comes from. The province has set growth and jobs as its apex priority, and then it is informed by 4 policy priorities underneath growth and jobs, which is growth for jobs, it is safety, it is an educated, healthy, and caring society, and innovation, culture, and governance. These policy priorities, as contained by your PSP, are then distilled into targets according to DPSA regulations and rules. And you have your strategic plan and your annual performance plan then per department, and that has to speak to your provincial strategic plan. So the targets that we see in these reports, you have annual targets, but departments, we also have quarterly targets in order for us to get to our annual targets. And what we do in our sister department in .p is we then take those targets, and that gets put into our non-financial performance that you see before the committee today. And that includes things, the non-financial performance includes things like our GDP, our Gini coefficient, where we are on some of those particular metrics even. Those particular trends then come to the budget committee. And I always used to say that in budget committee, you try to really look for those trends that you're picking up throughout different departments, especially transversal matters. But committees individually can also, in granular aspect, interrogate this information. And what we do is the presentation before us today is really just the summary of the submitted report that we send to budget committee on a quarterly basis. Some of the new innovations, and I'll get to the financial part now, some of the new innovations in this particular presentation, you will see is we've actually put the infrastructure information a little bit differently, so that because we want the information in the report is quite big. So the presentation, we're trying our best to highlight the high level items, to highlight the key trends, to highlight useful information that we think the committee might be interested in. And even previously, new innovations from .p specifically included really putting the targets in and really quantifying it to really unpack what did the money buy. So some of the written information, the non-financial information that you'll see are key high-level interventions or feedback or outcomes from those particular targets and how that contributes to the PSP. But if .p wants to add to that part, I'd be really welcome. In terms of the financial information that the Provincial Treasury puts together, you will see that we focus a lot on expenditure, on our revenue, and then we do separately infrastructure, even though infrastructure technically also forms part of your overall expenditure. And that's where some of the new innovative slides have also come in. So the top things that we really focus on in this regard is, are we spending on track? So what you try to do in your budget, and the reason you do quarterly reporting, is it's ideally, and I completely agree that we need to have a conversation about the timeline of when we bring these reports and how it can be useful to the committee and useful to our stakeholders. Because, for example, I only bring this report also after cabinet approval. So I first have to take these documents and information to cabinet, and then we bring it to the committee for interrogation as well. But I think there's a lot of scope for conversation about how we can have a timeline that is really useful for our stakeholders to be able to use this information almost closer to real time, as the one member mentioned. So are we spending on track? Are we collecting on track? And also, what are those risks? Because risks aren't going to go away. And you're not necessarily always going to be able to plan for every risk, and you're not necessarily going to be able to deal with every risk immediately. But what the risks do, it is very helpful for future planning, so that you can try to see, okay, is it urgent? Is it immediate? Is it something we have to deal with immediately, an adjustment? Is it something we need to plan for the next budget period? Is it a process that has to change? What particularly do we need to deal with it during the MTEX with departments? So it's very useful then to have, for example, those particular risks that emerge. In terms of how we use it in terms of the budget process, as mentioned, the presentation really is a summary of the larger documents submitted to the Budget Committee. And that report goes into detail for every department in terms of spending. The member made an example of COE. We do take COE into account, whether you're spending on track, whether you're underspending. And not every department is the same. Some departments will have completely different reasons for underspending. So, for example, if I'm just using one example now, there could be many other examples. If you give money for posts, you have to give money for posts for 1 full year. So that's 12 months. So if you only appoint in the second month or the third month of your financial year, you're going to maybe have 1 or 2 months of saving. So that's where that technical wording of saving comes in, because you can't, in your budget, in your departmental budget, you can't plan for a salary for 6 months or 7 months or 8 months. You have to plan for it for a full financial year, because the moment you appoint that person, that salary of that person is going to have a carry through effect in your budget. So you have to plan long term for that salary. So if you don't appoint someone for that full financial year, if there's delays in your appointments, you are going to have savings. The question is why do you have savings? So not every department is going to be the same. Some departments, maybe it's a process thing. Some departments, it's maybe they need more people or less people. Maybe they're going through a restructuring process. It really does depend on the department, and the respective detailed report as submitted to the committee does go into some of that expenditure. It does also, the committee also has the ability, including the individual committees, because the individual committees really focuses on the various different sectors, and those various different sectors have the ability in terms of their oversight mandate to go into that type of detail and where it's relevant. And that's why I'm always so appreciative if people who are not necessarily permanent members of the committee also joins the budget committee, because I always find it so insightful that you're able to see the top trends and the transversal trends and the transversal risks that are coming into the system and how that might affect the particular portfolios that you also sit on. In terms of the cost of employment and inflation, so there's two different types of inflation that we mainly work with. We mainly work with like the normal inflation, and that's actually quite easy to plan for. When I say easy, I'm trying to be cautious here, because it's not actually easy, but easy within the context. And then you also have medical inflation, and medical inflation is actually much more difficult. It's much higher and much more difficult to predict. And if I remember correctly, and the team will have to correct me here, I think medical inflation last year was more than 10%. I actually think it was a bit closer to either 12 or something like that. But if the team can just quickly check for me after my feedback what that particular medical inflation was last year. And medical inflation really like keeps us up at night, because medicine, medical supplies, those items are in our top 5 items of procurement. So when medical inflation increases more than expectation, it does have a direct impact on the purchasing of goods and services. And that is something that you'll definitely see in a department such as health, whereas if medical inflation increases above expectations, that it has a direct effect on what they buy. In terms of investment in women's health, a member is referring to a policy matter and policy decision, and that resides with the health department. I do know that they have some programs in this regard, and health is also able to make more representations to the MTEC if there are any. In the previous round of the budget process, health did indicate that their biggest pressure at the time was COE. And this was what the funding from the Provincial Revenue Fund in the March budget was attempting to address, is that pressure on the COE. In terms of the projected underspending at the time for health, so as members would know, is one just before the adjustment budget, you will have your particular figures. At that time, health was actually projected to overspend because of the pressure on goods and services. So what the adjustment budget last year attempted to do was to attempt to relieve the pressure in terms of goods and services for the health and wellness department. So that projected overspending was after the additional money that health and wellness received. So that is taking into account the additional money that they've received. I'll just ask the team to come in here. I think that has been updated since. I think that actually, yeah. Let me actually not make assumptions here. If I think I remember the correct thing in my mind, but I'd rather leave it for the team to make sure that the update that we're providing is correct in this regard. Yes, Chair, I'm trying my best to just give the how we get to the processes and how we do the high level, how we use the information for our processes. I always find the quarterly reporting quite useful because I actually think that it's one of those things that when you see an annual report and the percentage of someone's budget spent or underspent or the type of things that came out of it, it really should never actually be a surprise. But if you are able to really keep track of the quarterly reporting, both on a financial and a non-financial level, you are able to make some real-time predictions, and that we call it forecasting maybe, in terms of where someone might end up at. And you use that really to engage different departments in terms of their risks, their opportunities. If there's a process that's maybe clogging the system or blocking the system, how can we assist in the innovation cluster? I always call the Premier's department, local government department, and provincial treasury, I call them the innovation trummies, the ICG people. So is there something in the governmental processes that we maybe need to unlock or help speed up to try and get certain things moving faster? HOD, I'm going to hand over to yourself and Treasury, and then maybe Dr. Ishmael to yourself and your team in Premier in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to ask Annalise just to deal with the questions directly to as it relates to compensation, and then the team from .P then to deal with the performance issues. Annalise, thank you.
Thank you, Jarinda. All right, so I'm going to first deal with some of the questions on the COE. And so firstly, what I wanted to indicate, when we're speaking about underspending, that is shown in our reporting system, we need to understand that is projected. So based on the current situation, the departments then make a projection of where they will end up at the end of the financial year. And that's what that projection of underspending or overspending then represents. It is a projection based on assumptions. Now, and so what I'm wanting them to then indicate here is that the way the model is set up, so in terms of and it's about the question of in terms of the net amount that the Treasury then speaks of in our presentations. So the net amount is determined by the model that we've also submitted to the committee, where the model then assumes a net amount of taking all the projected underspendings and the net effect of the projected underspendings and the net effect of the projected overspending, and then it gives you in terms of a final outcome. Now the model does that automatically because of the PFMA that indicates that the accounting officers need to then respond to their situations in terms of not having and minimizing over expenditure as much as possible. So that's why we speak about the net effect of it is, but the reality is there's certain items that has projections of underspending and other items that has a overspending, and therefore when we're speaking as the net effect, it is the net effect of those two things. So I first wanted to just speak on projections. So now let me go into them just in terms of, let me go into COE. So yes, in terms of the COE, in terms of when we're saying in terms of longer anticipated recruitment process. So we sit with the departments in the beginning of a financial year and are looking at the assumptions they're making when they put that COE budget together.
But you must just take the audience just to show them.
If we look at in terms of the assumptions that they make, and the departments do bring in their previous trends, they do bring that into the assumptions, but there is still an element that is that becomes unknown when the actual recruitment happens. So, for example, if they indicated in their recruitment process that they are going to take 6 months to recruit an individual, when they're going through that process, they might not in terms of when they have got applications, that they actually have applications that qualify for the post. They might also make a decision that based on the kind of applications they receive, they might not go ahead with the recruitment process. So there's some in terms of element of unknown in the recruitment process that no one can predict. Also, we've indicated before, no one can predict in terms of who the final candidate would receive that would be appointed. So if there are internal employments, so in terms of promotions, for example, in an organization, it then speaks for vacancies then in other posts. Now, the department cannot indicate how many internal promotions there would be on their recruitment process. So this all impacts then the kind of unknowns on recruitment processes that then leads itself to underspending on COE. Then on the COE, the member quite rightly indicates that in the rollover process, so at the end of the financial year, when departments want to apply to utilize their rollover, COE underspending cannot be utilized in the rollover process at the end of the financial year. Before we get to the end of the financial year, so before we have an audited annual financial statement, we in this province do have the rule that if departments want to utilize their COE, if there is an underspending on COE, and there's over expenditure in other areas, they can then apply to the Treasury for approval in that situation before a final annual financial statement is finalized. And they, in terms of, they do allow under those circumstances. The Treasury then does interrogate the circumstances. The Treasury does take risk into consideration in terms of kind of the information we ask the department. So there is in terms of a process that we put internally before we respond to the department whether they can utilize the COE to offset other over expenditure in other items. Then in terms of just some clarity in terms of the question where local government was concerned, in terms of local government, it is also a net because there's some overspending on capital for local government, and that is because they have rolled out the IT refresh program, and so in terms of some of the costs are higher than what they anticipated, and therefore there's underspending on their COE. and then also in terms of over expenditure on capital items, and therefore the net effect of those two is then the amount that we're reporting. Lastly, in terms of just medical inflation at this stage, is the fact that how we define that is that it is the inflation rate currently, and then it is about adding about 2.5% additional to that inflation rate, and that's in terms of what the health sector then faces. And then I need to indicate that where there is, in terms of this higher medical inflation in the health budgets across the country, there's no longer buffers in order to deal with it in that spending item even. And therefore, the Treasury looks at, in terms of the official position of the department, if there is the savings that is identified on COE, to utilize that towards the other over expenditures, for example, on GNS, because there's no longer buffers in GNS in health departments in order to deal with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member, second round of questions, Member Mbombo and Member Konlo.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I might have missed it, but based on what we see now in the current in what is reported now, based on the previous financial years throughout the country, just making an example, where allegedly the Gauteng has to return about 1.8 or something billion, where the KZN specifically in one department, where we find that they started the financial year with a shortfall of almost also a billion in regard to the COE. So the question for me is about how do you make sure during this time, because this is the third quarter, which is you already have undergone the MTAC process in terms of the reviewing the budgets, whether the departments wants to roll over or whatever. Also, at that time, you'll have had the first comms of the grants that will be able to get it for the following financial year, which is this one. So that time, at what extent that you will know in terms of the under expenditures of the department. In this case, in the Western Cape, this year, we heard about the 300 million for the infrastructure grant that was also going to be taken away. And also it's about, you hear about some of shocks in regard to whether they will have no money or not. So at what extent during this time that will be able to make sure that, because when we heard about the infrastructure, it was only this year, but it was like a shock. But my assumption is about you'll have received that kind of information. At what extent that you could warn the departments in terms of potentially that underutilization of the grants or of their budgeting, especially with where there are new HODs, like departments like health and education and whatever, they'll know, they're CFOs, they already been there, they know all of these things. But in some of the newish departments or combined or realigned departments, it might be a challenge for them. So what is your role in regard to that? As I'm saying that, because like in Gauteng now is a big thing, is if there's a shock, because I said, why would they be shocked that a 1 point something has to be returned to National Treasury? Yet there are in place, there are tools in place where they could be able to see and also do their risk mitigation in regard to that. And also lastly, if you would have, is there anywhere you will have received officially in terms of the monies that are being withdrawn, or whether the grants or whatever, for any department so far in the Western Cape? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Mbombo. Before I hand over to Member Nkondlo, I just wanted to check, HOD, is there something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, Chair, yes, I just wanted to add, with your permission, there was also a question in terms of our in terms of the provincial treasury and what do we do, and I think it's also linked to to Member Mbongo's comment. So we obviously monitor the expenditure, and there is definitely, whether it's yes, some of the more experienced CFOs and accounting officers would know exactly what to do, but obviously there's some changes there. But as a norm, we would have meetings either at management at all levels, management accounting level, financial accounting, as well as a CFO level, and ultimately between myself and the accounting officer. Should any of these patterns that we pick up, should these risks present itself, in the norm, we regularly engage departments, and if necessary, also then write to departments. We also then provide our assessments, whether it's from and it covers all disciplines, whether it's procurement and whether it's accounting, whether it's expenditure, because sometimes there's some underlying issues that would manifest in a number or a expenditure trend, and when we then engage and follow up with the department, and then you go a little bit deeper, then you get to the root cause, and that root cause could potentially lie without the public finance realm, so to speak, but then the different components within the treasury would be pulled in, and we actively engage the departments, the various departments, and assist proactively, but also when we see that there is also then potential for early support and intervention. And I use intervention not in the intervention in terms of just engaging the department and providing the advice that is required to deal with some of these issues.
Thank you, HOD. I just want to check before we go to the members again. I see Ms. Ishmael's hand is up as well.
No, thank you. I wanted to respond still to the question on Member Nukundu, and I wanted to add to the Minister's response on performance data, if I'm allowed.
I think yes. Let's please conclude on that first before we take the second round of questions. If that's fine with you, thanks.
Yeah. So thank you. Our Minister eloquently shared how we actually do the performance data and the process. I just want to take the opportunity to add to the question around how the members could use the data. So both from the Department of Premier and the Provincial Treasury, we focus very much on what is the pulse of the pulse in Western Cape government as it relates to performance. So if one look at the presentation, then the committee can actually look at, those key indicators, such as the Western Cape government average and the departmental average, and actually use that data, engaging the departments and actually asking that question in terms of, so what? So why are this trend continuously being under a Western Cape government average? The other slide on slide 5 and 6 is very much a slide which the committee actually requested, which is a quarter-on-quarter progress. So while in the socio-economic context we always get this quarter-on-quarter data, we try to do the same for performance data. Then the latter part of the presentation speaks also about the basket of indicators that represent that pulse for socio-economic conditions. And What we have done, it is focus on the outcomes on the PSP. But that basket can be much broader. But it also depends on what is the demand to understand the societal context. So the committee can actually use that to ask that critical question. So what is the response of government to the societal context with the existing interventions budgeted? A very interesting phenomena that surfaced in the employment data yesterday released was the needs data, that those that not economically employed and not in the education system. And one can actually ask that question in terms of not only government's response, but those lead departments that derive that, and how we actually engage as even our other social partners, whether it's businesses, also to actually turn that around for not only Western Cape but our country. And a similar situation we can do in the crime indicators, and some of they are also proxy indicators. And then I just want to answer the question in terms of where are we in terms of the performance data to show a much better picture than only non-financial performance. We have .P and PT have actually focused very much on the quality of our performance data and integrated our financial and non-financial performance data. But there's also slowly a shift towards much more multidimensional measurement and improving our visualization. Ultimately, we are focused on that whatever performance data it's out there, it is so that our residents can have a government that people trust. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to check Member Mkondlo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the responses. And I think the last colleague from Provincial Treasury, I think, is coming closer to, what is my interest, because indeed ours is not just to be thrown with data for its own sake. Our role is oversight. And our oversight has got to do with the reason why we're here as public reps, is the change in the socio-economic conditions of the people. So when you finance something that must change in society. And so long as we go into that society and we keep on getting from some levels of that very society, a differentiated response, where others are feeling, the conditions are not changing, surely data must help us to that effect. It's not for its own sake to say, yes, we are moving here, yes, we are seeing this graph and the other, because it's not going to help us as members, So I want to appreciate, I think, her explanation and her understanding of, our role at this particular level. And I want to go back to the minister and say, appreciating what the minister had said in terms of how the whole hierarchy, of the high-end indicators are set, right up to, the PSPs at a provincial level. One is actually looking for that, Minister, because for me, part of what I would like to see, and I'm hoping that the department can consider that, in the information that you have always been very open to assist us as Provincial Treasury. I think even in the past, when we seek assistance to understand information, you have always been very positive to us. So I'm seeking exactly that level, that macro level information that comes from the PSP to say, from a PSP indicators, this is what we are supposed to be delivering on, and this is what we are financing, and this is what through this quarterly performance we have done, as we go to all this other information that is sitting there, because it helps me to read this data in context. So I think for me, that is very important. And it's important because this provincial government, as it will always say, you are evidence-based, you operate on using data, to derive, the choices that you are making. If so, I think it's important that the reporting must also be able to help us contextualize beyond only having to sit down with you to look at it and say, these are the number of PSPs that you are having. And on this PSP, in as far as this particular quarter is concerned, against what we have financed for this particular financial year that we are reporting on, we are at this level of spending, in terms of those high-end results, let alone what at a micro level the department would have said to achieve such. I think it's important at this level to do so, because it speaks to what Member Mbombo is actually saying, because I think Minister in the House was saying, what we are told that the Department of Infrastructure, could not use more than 300 million for housing is not true. The minister is going to go and even taking up the matter legally. So if you are able to make such pronouncements, surely we must be one with you as the committee that is oversighting you, because we have been seeing this thing and we know what has been happening. It can't be a surprise and becomes a political football when we are sitting in the House, because for me, it's important in this particular quarter, now that we are told that actually this particular department, this year, we are told could not use and had to return almost 300 million. Where is this in this particular quarterly report? Where do we see that particular 300 million that was not spent by the Department of Infrastructure? Because it's important to be able to say, here is it. Yes, we understand it. Actually, it's national government who is actually representing or misreading what would have happened, because it is indeed not an underspending, because it is not an underspending recorded in our quarterly performance. How does it become an underspending post facto as if we were not here? So I think it's something that, Minister, for me is important, because also when it comes to infrastructure spend, there is a book specifically for that, which this government actually crafts. So it's important also, as even in the quarterly performance report, because infrastructure spend is also another important lever at which we are going to derive the jobs. For me, I want to see that the departments that actually have got any capital expenditures, they have spent so much on their capital expenditure on this particular quarter, which in both directly and indirectly contribute to this number of jobs in that particular quarter, or in anticipation for the 4 quarters of the year. So for me, it's important to see that particular information, because the data must actually also be moving and responsive to the demands of the time. So when we can't be presenting and packaging data the very way that we have been doing it in the past 5-10 years, whilst we've got new demands and new strategies that we're putting up. So data also must catch up with actually what we are trying to achieve. So I would like for that to happen, Minister, if it could, with your department, so that there is more clarity, and more education on us as members, so that we are one when you speak in the House, when you present things, because these would have been sitting in our committee, and therefore there is no surprise from where we're sitting. I would also want to check with the department. I think Ms. Fick, if I'm not mistaken, says, as this provincial treasurer, you have a particular ruling or a particular, I'm not sure what's the right English word, but you've got a position wherein departments can actually utilize underspending on COE if there is over expenditure somewhere else. So I need clarity here. Is this something that is done in the Western Cape only? And if so, how is that in as far as, the National Treasury? Is there something, there's an agreement between you and National Treasury about this particular deviation from what other provinces are doing? And if so, if you can share that with the committee. And I would like to actually even understand, please share with us that particular policy that you have circulated to the department, so that we understand at what circumstances actually would enable any department to actually utilize underspending for something else, and what are the steps that gets to be taken. All of the things that you were explaining, I am sure there is a policy that you are implementing and that you are following. So if you can actually share that particular policy with us as this committee, so that we understand those particular circumstances. And on these two departments, if you can actually show us in your response, it could be a response after in writing, Chairperson, where the Department of Health, including a local government, would have indicated, or you would have seen, where is the over expenditure that justified for them to utilize the money of COE on goods and services, as per the explanation that has been given. So for me, I think it would be important to actually see that work and be able to understand how it happens. It will also help me into the future to understand how this notion of COE management, to ensure that you don't, as Member Mbombo has made reference, you don't get into the situation like Gauteng, who actually end up sending back billions of rands because COE was not spent. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo. Member Masipa.
Chair, mine is not as long as Honorable Nkondlo's question and comment, but I just want to go back to my question that relates to, obviously, budgeting for inflation, but at the expense of, obviously, the employment where, service is not really being delivered because of shortage of staff. Maybe, to just help the department to really address this question, is that have they really maybe done a trend analysis to see as to what is the impact of this inflation in terms of really not being able to fill the position, and with obviously, sometimes result in that, projected expenses not being spent, but at the same time you sit with the cost of employment positions not being filled. Because that's just my worry that, we, the department continues to budget for this inflation, but at the end of the quarter or end of the year, then that budget for inflation is not exhausted. But at the same time, we're sitting with, vacancies in the department, it's a kind of a trend analysis in terms of the impact on vacancies. What is the kind of impact that this is having, or over a long term, what are the implications if there are plans to just make sure that, the department is not over budgeting for inflation, with the resultant that, there is money that is not being spent because it was budgeted for inflation. But at the same time, you've got, challenges, and I will refer to health. There are many challenges as we visit hospitals. We see that, there are some really attentions that are required, from staffing to obviously, maintenance of the buildings, which are really a big concern. That, now we are seeing that there is amounts that are being budgeted for goods and services, obviously with inflation in mind. But at the same time, what you are seeing is that, the money, is not really being spent, but the challenges do continue to exist in those environments as a result of vacancies not being filled, queues being long, and all those kind of issues. I hope that clarifies my initial question. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Member Masipa. I just want to check, my apologies, Member Petrus, I saw your hand earlier. Is there something that you would like to ask, or any comments from your side? Member Petrus, if you can hear me.
Yes,
There we go.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson and colleagues. Chairperson, I just want to know how will the new routes model of district municipalities, or which involve the district municipalities, how would it influence future spending, especially on staff?
Thank you, Member Petrus. Minister HOD, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll try to take some of them first. In terms, I'll start at the DRI items. So the DRI, the grant relating to human settlements, that grant was reduced after December. So that grant doesn't relate to the core performance that we are putting before the committee today. That will those figures will reflect in the next quarter performance, which will be the final, the quarter 4, because it occurred in quarter 4. It occurred, if I remember correctly, it was somewhere in January where the Gazette came out and human settlements reduced the I think it was January. It might have been February, but the team can correct me here. But it was in quarter 4. I remember that happening in the new year, the new calendar year. Let me put it like that, the new calendar year. So that will reflect after December. Minister Simmers is currently challenging those figures in terms of the National Department of Human Settlements, in terms of and that's based on the underlying figures, that there is disagreement as to how far the spending was at the time. In this regard, and I'll ask the team to also just come in here because we support the department at times with calculations in this regard. In terms of the Gauteng processes for accruals and overspending, I can't speak for the Gauteng processes. I did see my colleague yesterday at a different meeting. However, I'll ask the department from our side if we can just outline the processes from the Western Cape for what happens if there's overspending, what happens if there's accruals. For example, with accruals, when you have that goes off your budget first before the rest of your budget. So it's not good having accruals because when you're needing to spend in your financial year, your new financial year, you first that those accruals in your budget, if there's a lot of accruals in other provinces, perhaps that will first go off your budget before you start spending on your new financial year. But I'll just ask the team also in Treasury to come in regarding how we deal with overspending, how we deal with accruals. And as Ms. Pick said previously, the projected overspending that you'll see in the different quarterly reports are projected at the time. So if we've allocated you 10 Rand for the full financial year, based on your own spending patterns, we will then see is it projected overspending or projected underspending, and that's based on if you continue spending like this, for example. And then obviously we try to engage departments as much as possible when we start seeing those particular items. And because in the Western Cape, we don't want overspending. So you won't find overspending in our departments at the end of the financial year. The human settlements is obviously a little bit different because they had the money that was taken away from them in terms of that particular gazette and that they are challenging at the moment. But I'll just ask the team to come in here to take us through that particular processes. Then in terms of Dr. Ishmael covered me in terms of some of those metrics. But just to add to some of those metrics, some of the information that we'll see in the report dealing with the policy hierarchy of processes. For example, we will see the metrics of jobs in slide 7. quarter on quarter. GDP is also on slide 7, our safety metrics on slide 8, our well-being metrics on slide 9. Obviously, there are many other metrics that one can use as well, and that is incorporated in departments, but those were some of the high-level metrics that .p has included in this particular information for us. In the information before us today, when we look at the targets, so you won't see the new PSP targets in quarter 3 or quarter 4, because the new PSP targets only comes in once we adopted the PSP, and the departments have to now have those new targets. So you'll likely only see those new metrics coming in quarter 1 of 2025 financial reporting and non-financial reporting. But Dr. Ishmael needs to assist me here, because I know that there's also a process for when targets change and you have to update them, and those go into the different reports, and those are also linked to your respective department's strategic plan and annual performance plan in this regard. So from a budgetary level or a budget committee level, we try our best to just give the overviews and the trends and the highlights, and the particular detail of that report that goes to budget committee that this presentation is based on. And in terms of the infrastructure slides, there was a question on the infrastructure and the spending on infrastructure. The expenditure by vote on infrastructure is on slide 15 of the presentation, and the expenditure by category of the infrastructure is on slide 16. And this detail has also been submitted to the Budget Committee as part of the full report. And perhaps, Chair, if the procedural officer could perhaps just confirm that the committee has received that report. Is usually quite a long report. It goes into per department and all the different details, for example, infrastructure expenditure, revenue, reasons that they've submitted, the respective targets per quarter. It usually goes into all of that detail per department. In terms of the policy regarding when there's COE underspending and steps to use it for other items, I'm sure that we are able to provide that information. The members asked for it in writing, but if HOD, if the team could maybe just take us through the process that a department would have to follow if they request that particularly. In terms of the inflation, Member Masipa, this is very difficult, because it's one of those things where you really try your best to plan for what is being projected in the economy, but the economy could change. So it's very much possible that, say, for example, you're projecting 10% or 12% for medical inflation, and the next morning you wake up and now medical inflation is 13 or 14 or 15%. So we try our best to project what will happen, but it's not always accurate. So, for example, and this is now not relating to inflation, but it's just an example of projections. So, previous years in government, we planned 17 Rand per dollar for Microsoft licenses. So, this past year, in the past budget engagements, what we said is actually we're changing that figure now. We are going to project our expenditure at 19 Rand at the dollar to try and get closer to reality. The problem is that the day that you make the payment for your Microsoft licenses, the dollar isn't necessarily going to be 19 Rand on that particular day. It might be 20, it might be 18 if we're lucky. You know, it's these fluctuations in the economy. So even though we're doing our best to project for that particular line item, it is very possible that it might not be that exact amount at the time that you purchase that particular goods or services or goods in this regard. And it's very similar in terms of medical inflation, that by the time you purchase something, the price could have gone up. And when the price goes up, there are things in the economy that, unfortunately, as a provincial government, we don't control, but we do try our best to project for this. In terms of the roads model and district municipalities as future spending of the staffing, I'll just ask, I think this is probably with our infrastructure unit, I'll just ask Provincial Treasury team to come in here. I know that DOI is currently busy with the roads model for district municipalities and the future spending. Given that the roads function technically belongs to the province and the district municipalities were simply implementing it on behalf of the province based on how the previous model worked, it lies with the respective executive authority where the implementation will lie. And in terms of roads, which falls under infrastructure, that executive authority decision would fall at infrastructure. And as Provincial Treasury, we will continue supporting the respective departments in terms of how they then fund their implementation of their particular functions, whether that lies at a provincial level or otherwise. But I'll just ask the team to come in there, just an update on that matter as well. HOD, thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair, to the committee. I think Minister covered all the questions. So I think there's just something on the IYM that we will respond to, but I think all the questions Minister already covered in quite some detail. Annelies, if there's anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, I'd just like to add in terms of just to indicate to the committee. So some of the detail that we provide is some of them that we provided to the committee, and I'm referring now to the questions on over projections on overspending and underspending on items. So that we provide the committee the detail on each of the departments for all the spending items, so the over expenditure and the under expenditure. But Chair, we note that the question has been on these specifically these two departments. So we will, in terms of respond of that, but just to make the committee aware, they do have the information, but we'll package something to give a bit more detail and understanding on health and local government particularly. Secondly, Chair, just in terms of I just want to reiterate, in terms of Member Nkondlo's question, we will provide the policy documents, but I just need to reiterate. The member made the statement that COE is not being allowed for any other purpose. That is when the financial year has closed, that the annual financial statements have already been drawn up for that financial year, and then departments are applying for rollover. Then that rule applies. Other than that, during a financial year, other provinces allow the departments to respond to their over expenditures by utilizing any savings, including COE. So that's happening in other provinces. I want to make it clear that in the Western Cape, that is allowed, but it must be with the approval of the Treasury. That is an additional step that we have put in our province. We will provide the circular that we have issued to the departments where that is concerned, Chair, but I just need to make sure that the members understand the rule that you cannot use COE for other purposes. It's only when a financial year has closed. Then that rule applies for rollover, but not during the year. But we will provide the committee the documents that are referred to in terms of the rules that we have applied. Lastly, Chair, just in terms of what Minister has indicated on the roads function, in terms of the roads function, the Department of Infrastructure has indicated to the district municipalities that there will be, in terms of this year, a 12-month process in getting the understanding of the implications for each of those districts, because they have different kind of implications on each of the districts, what those implications are. So there's a process for the next 12 months to unpack what that is. Then in terms of unpacking, in terms of what the individual impacts is for the various districts, that then would be unpacked in terms of what then the responses would be, and then what kind of risk mitigation needs to be put in place by both parties. One of them that will be raised is in terms of the impact on staffing, and then where we fit in with as the provincial treasury, we're looking at in terms of that process now for the 12 months that will the district municipalities and the Department of Infrastructure will undergo. We will now have in terms of both our municipal teams and our provincial teams will now then sit with the parties in terms of getting an understanding of the impact and then advising in terms of risk mitigation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. HUD, I see your hand.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Maybe just to add to the question, to the response, if need be, we can also share with the committee the practice notes on performance targets and adjustments, and I think that will also just assist in a deeper understanding of how we deal with these things in here.
Thank you, HOD. Members, can we do a final round of questions or follow-ups, if there are any? I do not see any hands.
Chair, sorry, Chair, I'm not sure you saw what I wrote on the side.
We saw what you put in the chat. Is there a question or is it a...
No, the minister was responding in regard to that it won't appear in the current report they are presenting the third quarter in terms of the grant. But what I'm saying is about in that third quarter, it's the quarter where the departments will have done requested and presented to Treasury when they see that they might not meet the targets. So that's when whether they will be asking for the rollover or whatever, but already within the Treasury, they will be able to see at what percentage of those targets will have been achieved and won't be achieved. So the point that I'm trying to make is I was making an example of the Gauteng of the 1.8 billion, that when these things happen during the financial year, it would have been picked up, the system would have picked it up previous year, specifically in this third quarter or the fourth quarter. So in the Western Cape, the departments do they send to the Treasury, they present, they motivate and say, we won't be able to meet this, therefore we'll ask for. So there is no way in the year, which is this year, you'll be surprised that you are not meeting the targets or you wouldn't have actually presented to the Treasury if you want to shift the monies. I do understand that with the direct grants, it might be difficult, but there are some of the indicators that will be motivating to the national in regard to for the grant to be reduced or for the rollover and so forth. So that's why I'm asking, in this third quarter, was there any indication that they won't be able to meet the targets? And also there was an indication that they will be underspending the budget. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Member Mbombo. Minister or HOD, would you like to respond to Member Mbombo's comments?
Yes, definitely, Chair. I think with the targets, maybe the team can assist me, but I'm looking at the expenditure as at 31 December. That's on slide 11 when you look at infrastructure. And infrastructure at 31 December was at 70.4% of their spending. And you can see in the last column, there was no projected over or underspending because they were on track. You will see a lot of the departments there were doing well in terms of their spending as per the end of 31 December. So at 31 December, there was no projected underspending for the Department of Infrastructure based on financial performance. There was also no overall underspending predictions at that time. So even at 31 December, there was no indication that they would not spend money. So I don't know what the National Department of Human Settlements is really relying on, because their figures that they were using is even before 31 December. So the numbers that National Human Settlements were using and the numbers that I see in front of me is just it's not, you can't compare the two. But I think it's one of those things where the committee could definitely call in both human settlements nationally and the unit within infrastructure provincially to compare the figures and to try and understand from National Department of Human Settlements, why are you relying on particular figures? And for the Department of Infrastructure, also to be, here's our figures, here's our targets, here's where we're at. And if I remember correctly, at the time they were very much on target with the delivery as well. At the time when that gazette came out, I'm just going to ask if the team can also come in here. I know we do have regular engagements with DOI on these matters as well, just so that to provide some detail. Because I don't see that particular detail in this report, which I also understand why it's not in this report. It's because it occurred afterwards. But the team can perhaps just assist us here, please, HOD and team.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, Chair. Maybe we can just, because Minister dealt with the financial stuff, can I just check with Zak any input on the performance in relation to Member Mbombo's question?
Yeah, thanks. Yes. On the performance, the departments reported on Q4 their performance, but they're currently busy with the pre-audit performance reporting in the electronic quarterly performance reporting system. So the annual targets that has been set in the annual performance plans will now be realized to understand if they have met their targets for the year. And as I said, they are currently busy with the process of capturing. If there are any deviations, the departments do confirm any concerns on performance and how they will address that. At this stage, it's difficult to confirm if targets have been met, because some of the targets on a quarterly basis do flow over into the second quarter. So the quarterly basis of reporting provides an understanding of how they progress towards that annual target, but only once the pre-audit data has been captured and confirmed and signed off, we will have a clear understanding if there were major concerns with regards to achieving those targets.
Thank you very much. Members, that then concludes our deliberations on the third quarter performance. I would just like to afford the Minister and the HOD opportunities for closing remarks if they wish to make use of it. Minister.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the committee members. I know that sometimes finance isn't necessarily the most fun topic for people. It sometimes can be quite technical, but we are trying our best to tell the story of what those numbers mean. And I want to thank also our colleagues in .P for putting those, for example, those non-financial information together and how that speaks to the financial information in departments. And I've made some notes of some of the questions. And I think it's something that we always take into consideration, how we can improve some of these presentations, improve our reporting. Some of the new innovations that we've been able to see is, for example, .P has included for us the quarter upon quarter metrics in these presentation. From Provincial Treasury side, at the infrastructure level, we've changed some of those slides to show more in detail the expenditure per vote and per category, and we will continue to find innovative ways to be able to make sure that the information is useful and how we can make sure that we connect the finances with the story of what they they're buying and what we're paying for really in our province, because that's really what the money is all about. Is, are we spending the money on what we said that we were going to spend in terms of our strategy, in terms of our vision, and in terms of our planning? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. HOD, anything from your side?
No, Chair, I'm covered. Thanks.
Thank you, HOD. Minister, HOD, and the entire team from Provincial Treasury, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure you've got a lot of other more important business that you are dealing with at the moment. So thank you for joining us. You are welcome to leave the meeting now. The members, if you can just please stay behind while we conclude some of the administrative issues that we have to deal with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, we just have to consider some and adopt draft committee minutes of previous meetings, as well as a activity report. Mr. Davids, if you can please just take us through the first set of minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, just to indicate that the third and the fourth quarter report is still in the administrative phase, Chair. So those reports will be ready for when our next meeting takes place, Chairperson. But Chair, if I can just take the committee through the last minutes that the committee had, Chairperson. Chair, if you can indicate if you can see this,
We can see the minutes. Thank you. It was the meeting that was on the 3rd of April 2025. It was a virtual meeting as well.
There we go, Chair. Chair, so Chair, so this was basically, Chair, just a meeting where the committee looked at all of the committee reports, Chairperson, of the Western Cape Appropriation Bill, Chairperson. So that was after all the standing committees or portfolio committees basically considered their individual reports, Chairperson. And then Chairperson, basically it was who supported, and then there was also Chairperson, the ANC indicated that they prefer a minority report, Chair, or a minority view in the committee report, which was indicated, Chairperson. And that report was ATC, Chair. Then basically there was just consideration and adoption of previous minutes, Chairperson. And Chair, because this meeting was so quick, Chair, it was a 20-minute meeting, Chair. There was no resolutions or actions for the committee to take further requests for information from the departments, etc., Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davids. Members, can I ask for someone to propose the adoption? Any of the permanent members? Can you hear me? Any members to propose the adoption of the minutes? Mr. Davids, can you hear me?
Yes, Chairperson, quite clearly.
Members, is there anyone that... There we go. I see Member Mkondlo.
Yes, Chair, can I propose the adoption of the minutes?
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. Anyone to second?
I think it might be of the cold, Chairperson, that the members do not maybe want to raise their hands.
Let's just see if anyone can hear me. Members, we need someone to... I see Member Noma French Mbombo. Thank you.
Yebo, Chair. I second.
Thank you, Member Mbombo. Mr. Davids, is there any other?
Chairperson, yes, it is just with regards to the resolutions of today, Chairperson. I've basically captured about 2 requests for information, 3 requests for information, Chair, and 1 resolution, which is a briefing, Chair. With your indulgence, Chairperson, the department from Member Kondlo, just with regards to the capital expenditure specific and in relation to the goals of the Western Cape, when the provincial treasury can brief the budget committee again, that they include a slide with specific regards to that, and the department indicated that they will supply the committee with the policy or circular for departments in the Western Cape, which speaks to the underspending and the environments and the shifts between funds, especially where it relates to the usage of CLE chain. And then also the department indicated that they can send the committee the practice notes on adjustment targets and performance. And then the minister, the MEC, also indicated, Chair, that perhaps the budget committee should, with regards to infrastructure and the targets expenditure per quarter, perhaps look at engaging with the national human settlements and the provincial department of infrastructure, Chair, in terms of that, Chairperson. I do not know if there's any other resolutions from the committee out of this meeting, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davids. Members, any further resolutions, actions, requests for information that you would like to add? Member Kondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I want to support the resolutions, especially, I'm not sure the one on the Department of Infrastructure about this dispute of the underspending of 300 million for housing. I think it's important for us to actually get briefed about this matter, especially the financial aspect, because we've always been raising issues about underspending of conditional grants. So I think I would want to support that we indeed are kept on the loop of this matter. Secondly, Chair, I would like for us as the committee to consider requesting our own WCPP research unit to actually help us undertake research around the issue of COE underspending. And for me, I think it is important in consideration of what the Department of Treasury has indicated around some of these somewhat issues that are outside of department's control. You know, when it comes to spend to projections, you know, of filling of vacancies, but also the extent to which, you know, this notion of underspending of COE is something that is properly being utilized. And I'm raising this, Chair, because I think also we had a presentation in Scopa of both Provincial Treasury and the Office of the Premier, particularly the one that is dealing with the entire HR project of the province, wherein part of what was raised by the Office of the Premier is actually the fact that in some of these departments, there is an issue about whether the structure itself is properly designed, which actually lends us, you know, putting up monies for posts that open-endedly we end up not filling, because sometimes the actual structure is not properly designed. I think the Premier, the Office of the Premier, made that indication with actually a ceiling that they have as a percentage. I think it's 30, if not 20%, you know, that they were saying at least Provincial Treasury is not above that particular threshold. So I'm making this request, if we could, you know, consider this issue of underspending on COE on the basis of vacancy rates, whether it's something that is going to assist us when we're dealing with annual reporting and financial performance of departments on this item. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo. Mr. Davids, did you manage to capture that?
I've got that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davids. Members, any other further? Member Masipa, I see your hand.
Chair, thank you very much. I do support Member Nkondlo with regards to the challenges of the COE. But I wonder if, our biggest challenge is this underspend on the COE, or the biggest challenge is the funding, the amount of funding support that the department has got, because I'm not sure if the quantum of the money that is on the COE would make that big difference if really is spent. But I do understand that we definitely need to maximize or to really use as much as possible. But I think the share that we are getting, the allocation is just not enough. We have to make the best out of what, the department has to make the best of what they have, and that's why I was asking that question to say, how do you make, making the wise decision? Do you have to put a threshold on your inflation, targeted projections, in order to really be able to fund? And I think the other area that I think is a problematic, this might not be a resolution, but the other area that I think is problematic is the period it takes to fill the positions. That, we have seen it, and we are seeing it when you engage with the schools. They've not had principal for so many months, and I think those are some of the areas that maybe we definitely need to look at to say, what are the loopholes, the processes of filling the positions. But I don't think that the funding that is underspent on COE is that big enough to make a big dent in terms of really ensuring that, vacancies are filled. But I think key issue is, how do we maximize with what the little that the department has got? I thought I'll just make that point, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Member Nkondlo.
Chair, I think acknowledging what Member Masipa is raising, which I think is one piece of the very question we want to understand, because whether the money is sufficient or not, I think is a function of a scientific conclusion, that indeed there is insufficient money. Because for me, if the insufficient money that the department is receiving, and I'm not referring only to provincial treasury, I'm saying to the provincial departments, including entities, because this is a recurring issue across departments. If that money is insufficient, at this point, we are not having a situation where underspending is on the basis that the money was short. It's underspending because, delays in filling the vacancies, but it's all around recruitment, So I'm saying that question can actually be included in what we include in the research that would be undertaken, so that as part of it, perhaps at a macro level, we want to know if the money is sufficient, for COE in the province. So I'm just saying, I think it's an important aspect of the question, because what we could do is to put together the questions, so that they go to the research unit, and then the research unit will tell us, what are the questions that are actually in line with what we are trying to understand, and what questions may not necessarily be relevant for the question that we are asking. But for me, the issue is continuous underspending. I think it's not even a Western Cape matter. It's a national matter if we consider what the AG is always raising, because we are sitting in times where the economy is not growing. So each and every cent is monies that we must find a way to be prudent in spending monies. We speak about underspending, for example, in conditional grants, which is also another issue, especially with municipalities. So I'm just asking at this point that we focus on this one, on underspending on COE, so that we can best assist, in our oversight and also in our recommendations to the Department of the Premier, but also to all the other departments from a financial point of view, so that indeed, if we've got insufficient money, it means when we engage with the DORA process, we will have to then lobby for more money for COE for our departments than as this provincial parliament. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. I definitely agree with both your and Member Masipa's inputs on this. Members, any further resolutions to add? I do not see any hands. Mr. Davids, is there any other business that we have to deal with for the day?
No, Chairperson, that's all for the day, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davids. Members, if there are no further questions or comments, we can adjourn this meeting, and those who are on Scopa, we will see each other at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much. This meeting is now adjourned.